Good morning. Some of your faces I'm very familiar with, and almost all the rest of them I remember you from the Vareniki lineup at the MCC Festival. I have a preamble here. I'm feeling a lot of history in my soul this morning. Waldo Neufeld back there and I got our early education in the same one-room school in southern Manitoba, Hiawatha. I cringe at how we dressed up and behaved at field day events with a number of other elementary schools, and we as Hiawatha students pretended that we were First Nation people. I tell my children that story and they just say, "How could you?" I said, "We didn't know things then like you do now." So Waldo, we're way back. His dad would come to our house, my dad would cut his hair, and I would spend the whole time looking at this man that I was convinced was Goliath. His dad and my dad were good friends. Is Ingrid here? Okay. I wanted to say hello to Ingrid and say I get a little edgy sometimes, and I wanted to say hello to her and bless her for not being a Southern Baptist woman. There might be more of those. The other thing I would say before I start, our family is celebrating 100 years in Canada, back in Manitoba in August, and going through the history because I have to make a little speech to all the cousins in Manitoba that don't know anything about their past, that our grandparents on my dad's side left the Mennonite church and became Mennonite Brethren in 1892. So will you take me back? Is that what this is? Okay, thank you. Tongue in cheek, of course, but not. So it's good to be here. After nearly 40 years of preaching, I was a reluctant and surprising pastor. Congregations asked me. I didn't want to do it. And so now for 40-some years, I've been preaching. It now feels, after all this time of tripping very badly, that no longer, even though I'm going to do almost all the talking for the next 20 minutes, that it's a conversation. And I'm going to ask you at some point, about 2/3 of the way through, if it goes as planned, for you to speak up and respond to me on a couple of things that I'm going to say here. Some have heard me speak this sermon before. It's controversial. Of course it is. I wouldn't do it if it wasn't controversial. We can't read the Bible without some controversy. But the promise is, disagree with me all you want, just promise not to kill me. If we could learn that little thing in life, we'd be a lot better off. But first, a story. Some years ago, I was planning to go to the Middle East. Lois and I have been in the Middle East a number of times. We worked on a kibbutz there, a communal farm, and then went and studied there. I got my master's degree in Jewish studies there. And Ed and Karen traveled with me on one of my journeys there, so there's lots of history around that stuff. But this is a story about peace, I think. But I needed a pair of sunglasses to go on a trip to Israel and went to the Sunglass Hut at Richmond Mall. And as I was looking at these expensive glasses that I didn't want to pay that much for, the young lady who was running the store was paying more attention to two young men who were a lot handsomer and more worthy of her attention than it was to me. And so she kept going back to them, and I had questions to ask. And I asked her back 2 or 3 times, but she watched these young men closely, and I had misunderstood why she was watching them so closely until one of them, who had a little bag in his hand, grabbed a handful of hundreds of dollars worth of sunglasses, put them in the basket, and it was out of the store and down the hallway in the big mall. This young woman in her high heels went after them. She was just around the corner and was screaming at them, "Thieves, thieves, thieves." I had a pair of $200 glasses in my hands, and I didn't want to be a thief, but I stepped out because I needed to watch this. And she ran after them, and they were so surprised at about 30 feet away that she was chasing them that they foolishly stopped. She grabbed the young man with the bag of glasses in his hand by the arm and started bringing him back. Now, you should know that right here was the food court. So these hundreds of people, mouths full of food, all turned their attention to this young woman dragging this boy back to the store. I watched, and as she got closer and got closer, I stepped out so that they could come into the store between me and get back in the store. I was so amazed at what was going on. A couple of steps before they got to the door, he yanked himself away from her and started running. And he changed his direction, and now instead of him going this way into the store with her, he ran past me. I turned, Mennonite boy, pacifist, Anabaptist pastor, turned into a hockey player. I do not know, that in itself would have been so bad, but I formed a fist. Good thing that my mother had already passed away. And I went to, actually, I was really planning on hugging him. But it was meant to be quite a stern hug. I hit him quite hard on the shoulder as he was running by. He stumbled and went head on into the arms and midsection of a very large man coming the other way waiting for him. And he finished the job. He punched him 3 times down and put his knee in his neck and held him there. The people eating, including members of the Fraser View congregation who knew where I was coming from, applauded. And I stepped back into the store and couldn't believe what I had done. Even though I was okay that justice had prevailed, what was going on here? So many things happening at one time. So many things. That's life. So many things. Remember when we wore the bracelets? What would Jesus have done? So with many options in mind, I want to invite you, as we look at this Jesus text, which we look at for edification, for learning, for walking and talking with Jesus, for letting him get inside our heads, and for letting him to rub himself against us intellectually, behaviorally, critically, ethically, morally, spiritually, so that we can fully follow him and be part of his, what young people at one point would have called a love posse. Please know that I come to the text with the view that there is always more to the story than we will ever look at, we will ever see, than we even allow ourselves. I came across a writer, I don't remember who said that we in the West love to read a domesticated Bible. We believe that Western Christianity has spent all its time. I've been in so many Bible studies where we're looking for the answer, the one thing that this text is saying. And say, that's it. Now we've got it. And we know that's where that has got us as a church, to think there is one way to read these texts. The people who heard and saw Jesus, I'm convinced, in their context, in their day, they expected their magnificent, utterly creative Messiah had much more for them than they could possibly imagine to gain from a story. They assumed that there were layers to the stories to look through in understanding truth. And to get to God, how would we get everything down into one little item? After all, God in his greatness and his wideness was surely had far more for us than we could ever see in one moment, or put in a box or a bottle or in a book. So I invite you today to be curious with me, to look at a text which you may or may not have heard this particular interpretation of, but to turn it on and look at it and wonder it and poke it and prod it and argue with it. And we, again, to reiterate where I think we've gone wrong, we've treated the Bible like a grade 10 math book where you go to the back and look for the answer. wrong way to look at it. So our text in Matthew 5:38-41. And you'll notice that I asked us to read it through the New King James Version. Of the 13 to 15 versions in my office, this is the one that I like. On this one, you have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you not to resist an evil person. But whoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other to him also. If anyone wants to sue you and take away your tunic, let him have your cloak also. And whoever compels you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. The reason I chose the New King James Version, I could have chosen the New American Standard Version, is because of the usage of the words cloak, where is it up there, and tunic. The NIV uses shirt and coat. And if you look at all the versions, they have a number of different words they use for what somebody might be taking away from you and you should give back to them. I want you to know that I have borrowed heavily from Walter Wink, Bible scholar. Many of you will know his books from the 80s and the 90s, Naming the Powers, Unmasking the Powers, Engaging the Powers. There were a number of workshops in North America around his teaching. He has particular views of New Testament, and Kenneth Bailey, a New Testament. Probably he's well known to you. A professor in theology and linguistics, spent 40 years teaching in the Middle East. One of his books called Jesus Through Eastern Eyes is a must-read to read the New Testament. And while we were studying in Israel, I had 3 Jewish rabbi teachers. The school I attended, half of the faculty were evangelical, Western Christians, and the other half that they team taught were professors from Hebrew University or University of Tel Aviv and other places. One of my teachers was a 27-year-old double PhD rabbi who was one of the world's leading New Testament scholars. You could not ask that man a question without him answering with at least 5 or 6 New Testament verses to substantiate where he was coming from. Not a believer in Jesus as his Savior, but knew more about Jesus than anybody that I ever had met. And so he has really, really influenced me on this text that we're going to look at here in a minute. We had another prof, Bernie Resnikoff, was a wild, in all the best sense, crazy man who loved to bait us evangelical Christians from the West in his class. And he used to say to us, "We don't believe. Not the way you do," he says, "but we practice our faith." He said, "You Christians, you believe. We Jews are still waiting for you to practice it." And then he'd walk out of the room. So he was provocative, and these professors were wonderful for me. So let's exegete this text just a little bit. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. I'm not going to look at that very much right now, but I tell you not to resist an evil person. We have not known as Anabaptist people who are non-resistant or try to be what to do with not to resist, what that means. How do we just let them get away with it? I'm just going to throw this out. You can dispute this with me. I think what that word means, and we won't look any more at it, it means to not resist an evil person is to not take them too seriously. Don't let their thinking get inside your head, in other words. And let's leave it at that and move to the next. But whoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other to him. Often, if there are teenagers in the room, I ask when I've spoken on this to come to the front and ask them to try to hit me in the right cheek. And of course, and many of you will have heard this part of the interpretation before, if 2 people are facing one another and you hit the other person on the right cheek, you can't hit them with your right hand on the right cheek. You have to hit them with the back of your hand. Very important, my professor said, to know that you have to know that it's right hand and it's a backhanded hit. Because every man, woman, and child in the audience would know that's not a fight hit. That's a hit of criticism and humiliation. And they would know that that kind of hit was known to all the people to be administered by fathers, teachers, slave leaders, and men and parents, always in power to humiliate, and that the only victims of a right-handed hit are women, children, and slaves. So we have taken that to turn the other cheek as a submissive role. What Rabbi Danny said to us when Jesus said, turn the other cheek, if I'm being hit on my right cheek and I turn like this and he hits me again, he now hits me in the face. And it has now become a crime. It's now an assault. There is nothing in this text, in the meaning of Jesus, according to my rabbi teachers, that has to do with submission. It's behaving in a way so that the perpetrator who wants to humiliate the person might not stop, but will certainly think about not hitting again because it could cost him. And very quickly, it's only in one sentence, he goes to the second one. So he said again, just to repeat, the crowd would know that's talking to fathers and leaders and men, always men. If anyone wants to sue you and take away your tunic, let himself have your cloak also. When we think of who would want to take our tunic, our cloak away, we in our Western culture wouldn't know quite what that means. In that culture, again, the professor said and the rabbi said, the crowd knew that they were talking about the money lenders who lined the streets, in a number of streets, not only to work in the issues around the money needed at in worship, but for people who needed money for the day because the banks were closed. They would need money, and if they did not trust the people that they were going to lend money to, the money lenders would ask for a person's tunic. Not a cloak. The best word in the Aramaic and the Hebrew, tunic, is the undergarment that the men wore. If you would go today to the Safeway store on 41st and Oak Street in Vancouver, you might well see somebody, a man or a boy, that having something like this hanging out of the side of over the belt. Have you ever seen that? The tunic, the underwear that the religious men and boys wore, was usually like this is a Jewish prayer shawl, but their under tunic was an old or from the same cloth that they made prayer shawls from, with a hole in it through the head, and then the rest falls down around them, and they had the four tassels, which they then wore, hung down, now that they wear trousers, hang over the belt. And of course, Jesus criticizes, you make your tassels long to show how religious you are. So this is aimed at the religious people who are wearing tunics. Now, often, if it was a good money lender, an honest person, he would say, yes, pay me later, pay me back today or tomorrow. But if he was a bit of a scoundrel, and apparently there were a number of them were, they would say, give me your tunic, which was their underwear. And the words, again, the rabbis say, really weren't tunics and coats and cloaks and whatever we would use. The words were outerwear and underwear. So they said that what Jesus is saying, give me your tunic, give me your underwear. And now Jesus says, if anyone wants to sue you and take away your tunic, let him have your cloak also. So he takes off his cloak, pulls off his tunic and gives it to him and says, you can have them both. Really? What's he got left? Maybe a loincloth. But look at Luke 14. When the man loses his coat, he's naked. Are you kidding? Jesus is asking people to get naked in the street? My rabbi teacher said, absolutely. Why? Now, nakedness was known. The Roman soldiers and the Greek bathhouses and stuff, Jewish people were used to seeing men and women without dress. Jewish people, never. They were friends of my mom. You kept everything covered. You didn't even talk about what was underneath it. So my rabbi friends were saying Jesus was that provocative. And why would he ask people on the Sermon on the Mount to do this? Because if Guido had lent money to Moshe, and Moshe is now standing in the street naked, or nearly so, is the best picture we can have. People are saying, Moshe, what are you doing? And he would say, Guido took my tunic, so I gave him my cloak. No one would ever borrow money from Guido again. Have you heard that before? It's quite fascinating, isn't it? Next, he jumps with just one line. He jumps to, and whoever compels you to go 1 mile, go with him too. Who would make anyone go another mile in Jerusalem in the 30s? Soldiers. Roman soldiers were allowed to order anybody in the street to carry their stuff for them. And of course, we see it happening with Jesus when he goes taken to the cross. He is asked to carry. They found the records in Rome of the emperor at some point putting out a decree to all the Roman soldiers in all the lands that they were defeating in that era, that Roman soldiers were given the Romans such a bad reputation with making people carry their stuff that in Rome, the Romans made a rule that a soldier could only carry somebody else's stuff to the next milestone. If a Roman soldier was ever caught making someone carry it to the second, he lost his job as a soldier, and he lost his job to inherit a piece of land, which is what was their pension. In a land they took over, they could get a piece of land. So the word went out that you can't, as a Roman soldier, make someone carry. So what you have happening, and again, all the people in the crowd would know this is talking about soldier in this business of carrying a mile. But if then you get to the milestone, and Romans were famous for putting milestones up at every mile, everybody knew where they were. If you've carried his knapsack to the first mile, and now you run past and you're running past the next, now the soldier is running after you and saying, put it down, put it down, put it down, put it down before my lieutenant catches me. And so it became unsafe, or it would become unsafe if people would listen to this ruling by Jesus, to ever make them carry anything. So, what do we do with that? That's what our Jewish professors are saying was going on in this text. It feels a little gamey, right? It does. It feels quite dangerous. But what it does is it changes the whole picture. He's addressing two issues. He's showing his people, Jesus is teaching them how to non-violently, they're not doing anything violently, they're addressing how they are being treated badly. Might not work, but they give the chance of the aggressor to stop, one, and two, it could well force a change in behavior of the moneylenders, of the fathers and the slave leaders and the bosses and the soldiers. That's peacemaking. Question or comic? Comment, I should say. Comic too, if you want. Anyone want to respond to that?
If you were going to rewrite that passage, how would you do it?
For today?
For today.
Wow. Well, tell her. This is a... What? Yeah. How does that work in our day? Not pay our taxes? Go through the red light? It's a good question. Can you say that a little louder? Oh.
I think it would be like what you said about not resisting an evil person.
Mm-hmm. And not letting them get, your agenda. Yeah.
Until they've talked it all out, knowing it's, flesh wounds, they're not destroying your person.
Yeah.
Maybe that is how you would turn the other cheek.
Mm.
Kind of reminds me of the whole thing about give somebody enough rope to hang themselves.
Yeah. Give them enough rope. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think we've never created Jesus to be such a trickster, have we? Anyone else? Just like what's happening inside you when you hear that? And you can just tell me that me and my profs are crazy.
You have to really know where they're coming from
Mm.
in order to be able to respond in a way that
And I'd add to that, we also have to really know what we're doing so that we know in an instant, because you've only got a few seconds. And so all this praying and Bible reading isn't to be done out of a duty. It's so that you're fight ready to respond in a way that addresses the issue and even points to a more peaceful way of living. Anyone else? To know your enemy, yeah, to stay in conversation.
it also suggests that if you are being abused, let's sort of amplify that or shine a light on the fact that there is abuse happening there.
Mm.
Instead of just overtly accusing,
Mm.
say this is amazing.
Yeah. Kevin.
Wish all the people I know who are just read the Bible and do what it says type people would hear this, right? It's so deep and all.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot we don't know. One of the things that our profs often, our rabbi profs would say, and it felt, back to my criticism and our criticism of the church finding one answer, the rabbis would often say, well, that is true. There's, people would come, they're arguing, and he'd say, that is true. And that is also true. Go home and figure it out. But again, it demands relationship and patience. One of the things about modern Israel, with all the criticism that we can aim at it, and I've got lots of criticisms, when we would walk to school in the mornings, we walked about 1.5 kilometers, and we'd walk past all these little coffee spaces, and these were, on the western side of the city, they were all Israeli Jewish people, or most of them, in argument to end the world, it looked like. You couldn't go into a bank, you couldn't get into a bus, you can't get into a store without getting into a rubbing match with someone, because they'll just pull ahead of you. It's a very aggressive society. And they argue and they fight and they shout. They don't fight physically that we saw. And they'd be nose to nose. And when we come back 2 hours later, they were sitting there laughing and talking, the same people. Or a bus broke down in front of us. I was walking to school and the bus broke in a turn and there was a car got trapped behind it. And the driver of the car is honking the horn and yelling at the bus driver to get his bus out of the way. Well, the wheel is off right in front of him, but you shout anyway. But there was something really, really healthy for me that you could have a good argument and a good fight and still love each other. The problem, to get political for a minute, the Israeli people haven't applied that to their Palestinians. But within the party, wow, say and do anything. You go to a store 10 minutes before it's closing, and they kick you out. Well, I wanted this. No, we're closing. Get out. Come back tomorrow. And that's all there was to it. And if you had a hurt feeling, that was you were a baby. There was nothing wrong with them. So part of that's the context. How do we know enough, right? Anyone else before I just do the summation?
It occurs to me that all of these are speaking to men. And men have in that society at least a certain measure of power and control. And so, I wonder what it could look like if he was speaking to women.
Who wants to say something to that? By the way, this is because this is an MC church. I'm braver to say this than I would, but I should say it in an MB church. That I know lots of Bible scholars who are saying that the text about women keep quiet in the church has nothing to do with teaching or preaching and any of that other stuff. It has to do with, the 613 laws that Jews had to live by. A woman who was nursing a baby, nursing a child, was exempted from any of the other laws until she'd weaned that baby. So it meant that the women, as long as they were in their childbearing years, never came to the synagogue. Why go to church? It's easier to stay at home with the baby. What, are you crazy? But they also then, they were like this church, except that in a real synagogue, a real church, the men were here and the women would be up there. And the injunction, and David Ewart, one of our own Mennonite brethren, professors talked about this already 30 years ago, said when the women come back to the synagogue after having had babies for the last 15 years, the other women don't know what's going on here. And by the way, synagogue is very noisy and rowdy. The women were asking the men below, what's he saying? What does he mean? And it got so rowdy that nobody could hear anything. And that the Apostle Paul is saying, women, keep quiet in the church. And what have we done with that? You know what we've done with that. Now, my conservative friends don't buy that for a minute, but that's okay. Well, no, it's not okay. Yeah. Complicated. But Kevin, you asked the question. I've had people come up to me and say, if these texts can be this nuanced, what chance do I have? Well, you got to dig deep, right? In closing, this is a rather long closing. You know what this turning the other cheek means? What is it addressing? Because turning the other cheek refers to women, children, and slaves. It's addressing, Jesus is addressing domestic violence. The tunic, the underwear, the outerwear thing is addressing financial abuse. The third one, walking a mile with soldiers, is military and political abuse. Jesus has addressed the whole realm of our public engagement in the world. Phenomenal. Phenomenal. Jesus came to bring to earth his kingdom of God. Many times he said it was here already, but not yet. He held the kingdom as a mysterious but wondrous layered double world of his followers down on earth as it is in heaven. That's what it was about. And in that, he wanted his followers to experience that kingdom as his already in this midst. Let's try to do it now already in that way, with nobody being abused. Already in the midst and the vicissitudes of daily life, being salt and light. We're being salt and light if we would behave in that way. May not work, but it gives the person a chance to stop it. In the scramble of everydayness, in the middle of the very ups and downs of our days, the horrors and the joys. Don't wait, I think he said. Walk along now already. Jesus wanted us to know and to feel and to live the reality of his kingdom on the earth right now. And at the same time, look forward to the absolute manifestation of it in the next life. Jesus carried at least two realities in his hand and held them out to us in his thinking, in his speaking, in his being in this text. First, Jesus brought his listeners a strategy of shalom right on the everyday streets of their living, which was often abusive. He gave them a non-resistant way to address the power differentials and mistreatments that they faced right where they lived. Jesus was always interested in the whole person, in creating a new person, a new community, a new world, a new kingdom here and now and forever. His interest was in confronting the powers and principalities that run rampant today, still, in our private and in our unshalomed world. He came fighting with the power of his love, which is stronger than all else. Secondly, he called and calls us in our following to chat the gospel he brings. And he called and he calls us in all our following to address domestic violence, social and financial violence, and the abuse of all power, not with tooth and nail. Hence he said, do not resist the evil, but with intelligence and with courage, with wisdom, with truth and prayer, and the Spirit of Jesus working inside of us, in the market, on the street, everywhere we go. He called his people to follow him, to live just a little in a creative way that he one day would bring. We would die to bring life, to change the playing field of human existence, to transform our eternal destiny. Christ came to reboot the lost and broken Garden of Eden. His Spirit continues to invite us to walk with him, to work with him if we just will. He calls us to be participants in a world to which his shalom agents and peacemakers of a new way in his name are pursuing a radical way of living. His call does not always manifest itself here through a gentle, meek, and mild passive grid. Sometimes it manifests itself through an assertive kind of justice making. Dr. Jackie Lewis, some of you will know her, calls this manifestation of Jesus' actions fierce love. Fierce love. Fierce love is rule-breaking, border-crossing, ferocious, and extravagant kindness that increases our tribe. Wonderful words. And I'd add, increases our faith, our impact, our followership of Jesus, our living out of the kingdom of God with all the risks that come with it. May these teachings of Jesus touch us to follow him, to compel us to fiercely love this world, that God so loved his Son that he sent him, that we would walk in his shadow, exuding his light to one another and to everyone in the street with us, exuding that light to our neighbors and our enemies, those who would abuse us, and out into all the world. Follow Jesus. He invites us, he invites you and me to a constant craving to be near him, to be like him in living, to live in his steady surprise, because that's the best way to live as a walker in the kingdom, already here and now. Amen.